you're doing when you replay that conversation for the seventh night in a row isn't a search for peace. It's not your intelligence, your depth, or your conscience. It's rehearsal for a confrontation that will never happen. While you convince yourself you're analyzing your way out of the tunnel, the truth is far less comfortable. You're actually analyzing your way deeper into it. You're not looking for an answer. You're looking for a way back to the moment where you could have been different. And part of you knows that moment no longer exists. There is a kind of mind that doesn't know how to stop. Not because it's restless, not because it's agitated, but because it's in the middle of a quiet, endless investigation and can't separate itself from it. This isn't one conversation, it's a pattern. The ex you're still mentally writing letters to 3 years after it ended. The boss who threw a sentence at you in passing and now has his own room inside your head, furnished with things you brought him yourself. You gave him the key. This isn't anxiety. Anxiety is fear of something yet to come. This is the opposite. An obsession with something that's already over but refuses to end. And here's the first uncomfortable truth. You're not trying to close it. You're keeping it open. Picture an interrogation room, small table, one lamp, 2 chairs. On one side sits the interrogator, on the other the suspect. The interrogator demands a confession, the suspect gives one, but it's never enough. So the interrogator rejects it, asks for another, rephrases the question. Hour after hour, day after day. Now imagine the interrogator and the suspect are the same person. That's your mind. When that happens, the interrogation can never end. Because both sides sit in the same room and neither has the authority to open the door. The confession has already been given 100 times, but something in that room isn't looking for a confession. It's looking for something else. That's why you write emails you never send. That's why you replay a conflict that no longer exists in reality, but you're still finishing it. That's why you deliver lines in your head to someone who's no longer listening, as if someone else is. But no one is listening. It's just you, in a room you built yourself, talking to yourself, convinced it's thinking. In Shakespeare's Macbeth, there's a moment that few people fully understand. Macbeth commits murder and hears a voice telling him he has murdered sleep. From that point on, his mind becomes a permanent interrogator that won't allow silence, not because something outside is chasing him, but because something inside him has decided that peace is no longer an option. Most people never kill anyone, but most people carry something their inner interrogator refuses to release. The smallest gesture, a look, a word they shouldn't have said, a moment of weakness from 5 years ago that only they remember. The trigger doesn't have to be big. The smaller the trace, the harder the mind works. Because a small trigger demands a long explanation, and that explanation is built in that room, hour after hour, day after day. And now they sit with it every night in that same room. This mind has a name in astrology. It's called Mercury Pluto. Mercury is the principle of language, categorization, speed of thought, the way the mind processes the world. Pluto is the principle of compulsion, the underworld, extremity power that doesn't know how to stop. When these two planets sit together in someone's chart through conjunction, square, or opposition, the mind no longer thinks in order to understand. It thinks in order to rule. And that's where the problem begins, the one nobody sees from the outside. From the outside, this person looks intelligent, perceptive, patient, capable of breaking any problem into parts, seeing deeper than others, arriving at painful, precise insights about themselves and everyone around them. On the inside, that same person lives in a prison because Mercury-Pluto doesn't think its way out of a problem. It thinks its way back into one. To go through it one more time, but this time with the right answer prepared. To walk back into that room from a week ago and say what it didn't know how to say then. To reclaim the power it didn't have in that moment. This isn't thinking, it's revenge. Revenge that will never happen but must be rehearsed every day. And here an opposition opens up that this mind cannot resolve. There's a belief, very deep, very seductive. The more I understand, the freer I become. To see is to know. To know is to control. To control is to be safe. But that's not what happens with Mercury-Pluto. The more it sees, the deeper the seeing drives it into the same tunnel. The more it understands, the tighter the tunnel closes around it. Understanding, which was supposed to be the exit, becomes the architecture of the prison. Susan Nolan Hoeksema, a psychologist at Yale University, developed a theory in the 90s that she called response styles theory. She demonstrated something uncomfortable. People who process their grief through repetitive thinking remain depressed significantly longer than those who don't. Understanding your own pain, it turns out, is not the way out of pain. Often it's what feeds it. Go back for a moment to that interrogation room. There's no longer an unknown person sitting there with an unknown guilt. Now it's you. With a memory, a conversation, a look, that sentence you shouldn't have said. And you are both the interrogator and the accused, and you question yourself, and you answer, and you reject your own answer, and you ask for a new one. The most precise illustration of this mind in literature is called Notes from Underground. Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote it in 1864. The entire novel is a monologue by a man speaking from his basement room, analyzing himself into complete paralysis, into the impossibility of action, into contempt for his own capacity to understand. That is pure Mercury-Pluto. Understanding that has become punishment. I'll tell you something from my own experience because I think it belongs here. When I was 19, a professor asked me something in front of the group, and I gave an answer I considered precise. He paused, looked at me, and said, "That's the answer of someone who wants to sound smart, not someone who understands." He moved on. Nobody even laughed. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. For the next 7 years, I replayed those 4 seconds every night. I composed responses I would never give him. I conducted mental arguments I won every time. I wrote emails I never sent. 7 years of work for an audience of one who never showed up, and only much later did I realize what I'd actually been doing all that time. I wasn't trying to understand why it had stung. I wanted that moment back with the right answer ready. I wanted revenge. Daniel Wegner, a psychologist who worked at Trinity and Harvard in the 80s, ran a simple experiment. He told participants not to think of a white bear. 5 minutes. Whatever you do, just don't think about a white bear. The frequency of that thought ironically doubled. Wegner called it ironic process theory. The attempt to control a thought creates the reign of that thought, and now you understand why Mercury-Pluto can't let go. The harder it tries not to think, the more it thinks. The harder it tries to get out, the deeper it goes. Maybe you think this is intelligence. Maybe you think it's depth. Maybe you call it self-awareness or responsibility. But something in you knows you've been locked in the same room for a week or a month or a year, and that the exit isn't what you're looking for. You're looking for a way back to the moment where you could have been different, and you will never get it. A mind like this doesn't develop, it arrives configured. Mercury Pluto enters the world already armed. Thought becomes armor before armor is needed. Pluto gives Mercury a weight that doesn't belong to the speed of words, gives it a depth that knows more than it needs to know, gives it a suspicion that can't be quieted with an easy answer. A mind like this recognizes an atmosphere where words carry consequences and walks into it as though it already knows it. It doesn't learn it. It's been waiting. That's why this aspect rarely activates in empty space. Pluto always finds a scene where its nature can play out. A parent who can't be read. A system where every word is recorded. A community where one person asks the questions and everyone else answers. Mercury Pluto doesn't create these scenes, but it recognizes them, and inside them its structure develops to its full form. Thought becomes scanner. Scanner becomes defense. Defense becomes habit. A habit becomes identity. And there comes a point where it no longer matters whether there's any danger outside. The mechanism is so fully built that it no longer needs an external enemy. It can run on its own, on itself, against itself. Now you're that person. If you're sitting alone in a room and no one is attacking you, the mind will open a file anyway. If a conversation with someone goes smoothly, the mind will search for what went wrong anyway. If someone gives you a compliment, the mind will analyze why they gave it, what they want, how to defend against it. It shows up in everything. In relationships where instead of being with the other person, you're reading them, looking for the pattern, predicting their next move. You think that's closeness. It's actually surveillance. At work, where instead of saying what you think, you draft 3 versions, delete them, then finally send a 4th, or send nothing at all. In silence, where the moment you're alone with yourself, the brain opens the same room and invites you in. The clearest picture of this mechanism in literature isn't a novel, it's a letter that was never sent. In 1919, Franz Kafka wrote a letter to his father. 45 pages. Every sentence dismantles a single moment, a single look, a single gesture, a single meal at the table that went wrong. 45 pages in which a son explains to his father exactly what he did to him, how and why he will never be able to forgive it. And he never sent it. The letter was never meant for his father. It was meant for the room where Kafka sat alone conducting an interrogation he couldn't finish. That is Mercury Pluto in its purest form, revenge written down to the last comma, for an audience that will never show up. But Kafka at least knew he was writing a letter. What happens when the mind does it without even being aware? In 1886, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote a line in Beyond Good and Evil that many people quote but few understand. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss gazes also into you. Most people read that as a moral warning. It isn't. It's a description of a mechanism. Mercury Pluto believes it's observing, believes it's analyzing the abyss, a past relationship, its own guilt, someone's betrayal, as though it stands outside of it. but through the very act of looking, the abyss begins to look back. You become what you watch. Your structure begins to take on the structure of what you study. A person who spends years analyzing their betrayal slowly becomes a betrayed person. A person who spends years analyzing their guilt slowly becomes guilty. That's not a metaphor, that's what happens neurologically. In 2001, Marcus Rachel, a neurologist at Washington University, identified a brain network he called the default mode network, a network that becomes more active precisely when a person isn't doing anything concrete. What was later shown is that in people prone to rumination, this network is hyperactive. In other words, when a Mercury-Pluto person has no external task, the brain turns back to itself as the task. It becomes its own job. Go back one more time to that interrogation room. You understand it now. You know why it was built. You know who's in it. You know it once saved your life. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think that if they understand deeply enough why the room is there, the door will open on its own. That understanding is the key. That it's enough to analyze one more layer, one more reason, one more memory, and they'll be free. They won't. Understanding is not the way out of that room. Understanding is its finest furniture. You leave that room only one way: by refusing to continue the interrogation, not by resolving it, by closing it. The decision to stop thinking is not suppression. It's not avoidance. It's not positive thinking. It is a decision to close the interrogation, not to resolve it. There is a difference between understanding and processing. Understanding can be infinite. There is always another angle, another layer, another interpretation. Processing has an end point. Processing says, I've seen enough, now I let go. An integrated Mercury-Pluto is no longer a prison, it's a scanner. It uses its depth for insight, not for self-punishment. It sees in a single pass what the unintegrated version sees in 1,000 repetitions. It puts a thought down when the thought is finished, not when it feels like it's been understood completely, because it can never be understood completely. Freedom is not in a better answer. Freedom is in leaving the question, and that's not easy. The part of you that interrogates doesn't want silence. It experiences silence as loss, as surrender, as weakness. That part of you needs to be carefully but firmly stripped of its authority, not through conversation, through the refusal to converse. And that happens in one specific moment. The moment you catch yourself preparing the next round, looking for a new angle on the same conversation, a new argument for the same dispute, a new sentence for the same letter, and you say to yourself quietly, enough. I'm not resolving this, I'm closing it. It doesn't matter whether it gets resolved. What matters is that I'm leaving. That is where freedom is built, not in the moment of insight, but in the moment of refusal. The conversation is over. The boss has forgotten the sentence. Your ex is living their life. The moment from 5 years ago is remembered by no one but you. You are the only one still holding it open, and you are the only one who can close it. The next time your mind starts down the same path, don't look for a better argument. Stand up, walk out of that room, and don't go back.